Welcome to a Lunch and Learn from Roofers Coffee Shop. My name is Heidi Ellsworth, and these Lunch and Learns are for you, for the entire office, to learn about products, initiatives, what's happening in the roofing industry. We are so excited today to bring really an important class. We love bringing these 101 classes that really help everyone understand the different products of the industry. So our friends at Johns Manville today have brought TPO 101. Very excited about that. And we are going to be visiting today with Kaare Kurtzke from Johns Manville. Before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping. You will have a discussion sheet that please, I hope you have all downloaded as you're watching this during your lunch break, possibly. Fill out the Lunch and Learn discussion sheet. And as we go along, it will help you because online we have a quiz. Yep, after this, if you take that quiz, you can get a certificate for this class. So be sure to download the discussion sheet and then look for that quiz on Roofers Coffee Shop under the Lunch and Learn page. Okay, so let's get started. Kaare, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you on this Lunch and Learn. I'm very excited about this. I've worked with TPO for many years, and I feel like
Mhm.
I'm always learning something new. So this is so important for everyone out there. Let's start with an introduction. If you could introduce yourself and tell us what you do with Johns Manville.
Of course. As mentioned, my name is Kaare Kurtzke, and I am the TPO product manager at Johns Manville. So, anytime you hear TPO, new product offerings, new entrants into the market, anything we're doing in the TPO world at JM, that will be going through me. So, I would be a great point of contact there.
That's a lot of excitement, I think, because TPO is a leading product right now. So you've got a pretty cool job.
Yeah, that's when I came aboard Johns Manville. I kind of slowly started learning more and more of where TPO falls in the market, which we'll talk about today, and quickly realize it's a pretty big segment of our world.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So today, for this Lunch and Learn, we have three learning objectives. The first learning objective is an overview overall of TPO. The second learning objective is to understand more about TPO membranes. And third, to talk about TPO product lines, all the accessories, adhesives, colors, types of TPO that are out there. So let's get started with our first learning objective, an overview of TPO. Kaare, please talk to us about where TPO sits, maybe starting with the market share and working into some of the history.
Yeah, of course. So one of the big things when you talk about low slope roofing, single ply roofing, is you hear TPO a lot. We've said it already a lot today, but you hear it a lot because it's so dominant in the marketplace and kind of a mix. TPO came about kind of in the early 80s, the late 90s. And when we start looking at market share, kind of where TPO is, uh, it essentially went from zero, very small numbers in the early 2000s. And what you'll kind of see is it kind of ramps up very quickly to where we are at today, around 53% of the total low slope roofing market. So
Wow.
it went from very little to a dominant force right away.
Yeah. And, just for those folks out there, TPO stands for,
Thermoplastic polyolefin.
yeah, it's
So
a mouthful.
yeah, it is. It is. And I've practiced it since I came on board so that I could say it confidently today.
That is, I have to tell you, I'm always like going, do I need to Google that again? Because it's not one that easily remembered, but TPO is very easy. So let's talk a little bit about the history of TPO. How did it come into the roofing industry and really how has it grown?
Sure. So TPO kind of came about, after PVC and a little farther down the line, kind of in the late 80s or the early 90s. So by the time it kind of came over to the US, it was, right around 1990, 93, where we were playing with the idea of TPOs, thermoplastics. But we really started to see kind of an interest when we started to put reinforcement in TPO. So polyester scrim kind of inside two layers of the material, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then as we kind of went through kind of this development cycle, the roofing industry, we started using mag, or essentially magnesium hydroxide, for kind of a flame or a fire retardant. And kind of after that, kind of last big change, everything started to take off. We see Spry, the single ply roofing industry kind of market, kind of breaks out TPO from every other kind of single ply membrane, and that's kind of where everyone starts to pay attention to it, and it's just kind of taken off since.
53% market share with over 380 million square feet in 2006 compared to 1.8 billion square feet in 2017. Corey, that's a huge increase.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is when that kind of took off, you saw kind of every other kind of low slope roofing, we're talking EPDM or PVC or built up roofing, kind of all hovered in kind of the same area. There wasn't any, crazy dominant leader, but TPO, kind of as you mentioned, when it grew 53% in 2006 to 380 million square feet, that kind of was the last time it was really close to every other kind of membrane or roofing style there, and has just continued to go, like I said, from about the same as every other membrane style to that 53% of the market. So, if you think of it, every other roof is going to be a TPO roof.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it in the 90s, late 80s, it came over from Europe. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, absolutely. So over there, I think it was a flexible
Yeah.
polyolefin. And then over here, you probably started calling it TPO, so a thermoplastic
And
polyolefin.
when TPO really started hitting the market, in late 90s, 2000s, what were some of the what were some of the advantages or some of the things that really made contractors look at it and say, "Ooh, I think this is going to be really good for our business"?
So, I mean, one of the great things, which is kind of why it lends itself to the large roofs, things that people really want to be able to do a little bit faster, more efficient, and durable, is that TPO is a heat weldable membrane, and by that, what I mean is we can essentially take a hot air welding machine, and we can make a permanent seam. So where two layers of TPO overlap, we can kind of make that permanent seam. Water is not going to get through that. We have kind of a sealed condition, and that goes over the entire roof. So now where you used to have layers upon layers, you needed to have kind of special details. Now you're essentially able to weld down a seam 100 feet, 200 feet, and you get essentially what looks like one clean sheet. So it's a lot of labor savings with a lot of kind of durability and knowledge that you're going to have this waterproof solution on your roof.
And it was also one of the first really white roofs, and that when everything started coming out with reflectivity. How did that, when that first started to come out, it made quite, I can remember when it was coming out and we had all black roofs and now we had white roofs. How did that work?
So, I mean, that's kind of when you talk about, and you hit it kind of right on the head there. When we talk about like, why is it the fastest growing segment of the market? I mentioned heat weldability, labor savings, but the other is the reflectivity. If you were to look at kind of where the top states, the top markets across the US for TPO, it's California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, areas where heating concerns, has a lot of energy goes into trying to cool down a building. But if you, as you said, using that white membrane compared to, say, a black membrane or some kind of darker built up roof, you're going to reflect a lot of that heat away. White reflects heat, black tends to absorb it. So you get, of course, it's easy to use, but then building owners are starting to realize costs less money, less energy to kind of keep that building a little bit cooler. So you kind of get a great mix of from the installation side all the way to the building owner side with TPO.
Yeah, that I remember all this as it was happening. It was great. So let's go into our second learning objective since we're just leading that way perfectly. Our second learning objective are the TPO membranes themselves, how they are put
Mhm.
together, what it's about. So, Corey, it's an interesting product in that it softens when heated, hardens when cool. How does that all work?
Yeah, so that's kind of that's a key element of thermoplastics as a whole. So when we think thermoplastics, PVC, TPO versus thermosets like EPDM, you kind of fall into that segment, just like you said, hard softens when heated, hardens when cooled. So because of that, it's a lot easier to work with when you go to weld that material to get together. Kind of as I was talking about, you have almost like these automated kind of welding robots, we call them. And because it's being heated up, we essentially can work with that material very easily when we go to unroll it and go to weld that as we're trying to lay it out on a roof. It's not going to create kind of a permanent, you can heat it up and cool it down. It kind of goes through that cycle a couple of times, which is a little bit different than thermosets like EPDM.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you had said earlier that when it first came over, it did not have scrim, and then that was added. Can you tell us about that?
So when we talk about scrim, or essentially we talk about reinforcement, when you're looking at why you use a reinforcement, you're looking for something that's going to be able to hold up to things like dimensional stability. You're going to have stronger, say, uplift performance, where you have higher pressures, where you're worried about things like pull out or any kind of damage to the material. Once you have that reinforcement in there, kind of all the actual, in environment use cases kind of get better with that reinforcement. It's stronger, it's not going to shrink. You're not going to have a lot of the issues that if you just had just the raw material without kind of that scrim or reinforcement in there. So it became very, very clear very quickly that this just kind of increases the usability and the durability of the product.
So you have the TPO, you have the scrim in it, and then all of a sudden there started, because of your job as a product manager, started being all these new innovations. Let's talk a little bit about TPO fleece backed, because that really changed how things were going there.
Yeah, so when we talk about fleece back, the name kind of leads it to exactly what you think about it. You have a fleece material backed, right onto or essentially the bottom of your TPO. And the idea when you're using a fleece back material, you have some alternate installation options where you may have a hybrid system that might have granules on top of maybe a layer of built up roofing, or you might want to hot mop a material. The fleece back can essentially we allow kind of some of those alternate installation options. Not only that, you also get this kind of like protective membrane barrier for the membrane. Like when you have areas where it might be, say, high hail, you're going to be able to have kind of essentially just another layer that's helping out for kind of everything a roof is going to run into in the environment over, 10, 20, 30 years. So fleeceback kind of adds another layer of dimension that fleeceback TPO can be used for.
And there's different, like you just said, there's different installation methods. Can you
Mhm.
kind of go through that with the different installation methods for TPO and how that works, both TPO and TPO with fleece spec?
Yeah, of course. So when you think TPO, and we think, I say one out of every two roofs is probably a TPO roof. When we talk about installation, the by far and away the majority, over 70% of installations of TPO roofs are mechanically attached or mechanically fastened roofs. So the idea is that fastener is going down to the deck, 6 inch, maybe 12-inch on center along the length of the edge of that TPO that's being unrolled. And then we have that layer that overlaps the TPO that's being heat welded. So essentially you have one edge that is being, fastened to the deck. And then the other edge is being overlapped over something that was fastened. So you kind of get that waterproof seal there. So that's kind of one thing, is that mechanically fastened. One of the other versions, if we technically count as mechanically fastened, is induction welded. The idea that we're going to kind of have plates that are going to be fastened to the deck, but those plates through the induction process can be welded to the TPO. So now the TPO has no puncture through it or fastener or anything else, but you still get that mechanically fastened down to the deck ability. So kind of a little bit of a hybrid
Yeah.
idea there. And then what makes up almost the rest is the adhered solutions. So the idea, instead of essentially trying to mechanically fasten to a deck with screws and fasteners, plates, when we say adhered, kind of We talk about using membrane bonding adhesive, things that are going to be sprayable so that it can essentially be adhered to the cover board or the insulation right on the deck. So a little bit different of a system, but kind of makes up the second half, probably 22% of kind of all of the installed TPO roofs.
And
And then the last bit I always try to say is we always have a hybrid solution. And that's exactly what you mentioned with the fleece back, where you might have, say, multiple layers or something with granules on top of it, kind of like built up roofing, where you want a fleece back solution to kind of come over there. So it tends to be much smaller, single digit percentages of any installation, but it is a part of the market. It is a part of our business, and it's a part of solutions that people design.
that's so interesting. So let's just kind of also bring it back and talk just a bit about how TPO is manufactured, because I think that's going to help everyone too, as we have all these visuals now we've been seeing of everything of where it being installed and the types, but how do you manufacture it?
So I'm an engineer by degree, and this is kind of where I am very interested when I came aboard was kind of how do we put it together? Because the way it was described to me is if you look at TPO from the side, it almost looks like a sandwich. You have material on the bottom, your reinforcement or scrim in the middle, and then material on the top. And the way we kind of manufacture that is if you think, say, on a big piece of machinery on the left-hand side, we start with all of that scrim or reinforcement kind of on a giant roll. And as it gets pulled through this machine, the first step that it hits is an extruder. So essentially heating up that TPO material. And it makes this thin layer that kind of gets applied right to the top of that scrim or that reinforcement. So that's kind of your first top of your sandwich, essentially. So that's where we start to dial in kind of how thick is the material, as we'll talk about a little later for product options. So we'll
Mhm.
have that top layer of the material, say the white side, kind of the weathering side. Then it goes through the entire process, cooling down, making sure it's the right dimensions. And then it comes to have the bottom half of that sandwich. Essentially, again, hot thermoplastic is being pushed into through an extruder through these thin sheets. That's being applied to the bottom. And essentially what comes out the end of the machine is this nice, clean, 10-foot wide roll of TPO that essentially just gets spun up, cut right there at the end of the line, and then we essentially have this roll of TPO. So we start with scrim on one side, apply the top and bottom of that sandwich, and on the right-hand side, we essentially pop out, that roll of TPO you see on the roof.
Excellent. And if it was to be fleece back, does it go one more step to bring that fleece back on the bottom?
There's a couple of different ways that can happen, but a lot of times that can happen kind of somewhat in that process. Once that bottom part of the sandwich is applied, essentially you can apply that fleece back under there. And again, kind of still in that same piece of machinery. So when it comes out the outside or the backside of the tire machine, you have a roll of material. This one just happens to have fleece back on there. So the intention is all materials on one side, and on the other side comes out that roll you see on your roof.
That's great. Okay, let's talk a little bit about recommended use. When should commercial roofing contractors or low slope, because it's not always commercial, some of it is residential,
Mhm.
when low slope contractors really be using TPO?
Yeah, kind of the layer in kind of things we've talked about, throughout today is you're looking for places that are where it really shines, which is not to make a pun, but where places are you want high reflectivity, where it's going to be hot areas, wide open areas that you want to essentially have some thermal savings for AC. Big box and retail buildings, warehouse buildings, where you have vast amounts of space, essentially kicking out 100-foot roll really means you're going to be able to start covering a large percentage of that roof a lot faster than a lot of other options. And then the other one is potentially where there's going to be high uplift or wind uplift
Mhm.
pressures. You want to make sure that you have a stiff enough material that's going to be reinforced with welded seams so that you can make sure that it's going to be able to handle the environment and the elements that it's in. So TPO kind of lends itself to those kind of situations there, which are essentially all the way throughout the entire country.
And are there any roofs where it would not be recommended?
One of the things we kind of talk about, which is kind of one of my other counterparts, Brandon, oversees kind of our PVC portfolio, is we tend to say, maybe less places where you're going to have things like oils or kitchens or vents right on top of their roofs over there. So that's kind of the thing we say. While it does still hold up to all of those things, maybe especially as a JM may have another material that just kind of shines a little bit brighter over there. So it's not to say that it's going to do poorly. We just may have something that works a little bit better where there's going to be kind of those kitchen oils or airports and processing plants. But that's why we have other solutions.
Yeah. And understanding the right products for the right roofs is so
Mhm.
important. And knowing that Johns Manville brings a lot of different solutions that will work in different places. Um, okay, so before we move on to kind of everything that goes along with TPO, let's talk just a little bit to wrap up this learning objective about the advantages. What are the advantages of installing a TPO roof for a roofing company?
So when we always talk about advantages, especially when we're talking about roofing, we want to talk about durability. Why is this going to be more durable? It's out in the open. Yeah, it's going to be out there for decades at a time, potentially. And I mentioned it a little bit before, permanently welded seams. The idea that once you weld it during installation, it's going to stay welded. You're not going to have leaks through an area like that. It's a huge advantage when we talk about TPO. The other is as we mentioned before, the scrim and the reinforcement. We're going to have impact resistance or puncture resistance. We have areas in the country we have bad weather. You have hail that comes down. We even have different areas of the country where you may have very severe hail, different layers. You want to make sure you have something that's puncture resistant, impact resistant. And then, of course, you have people, walking around up top. You want something that's going to be tear resistant as well. So the whole idea of these thermoplastic systems today is you want something that can stand up to the environment that it's in, and that's exactly what these are designed to do. And then, of course, the energy efficiency. You said when it came out, now I guess a couple of decades ago, back there, yeah, I know you had this energy efficiency that you started to get from these white reflective sheets. And it's just a huge advantage, especially in some of those very hot areas.
Yeah, it is important. And when you think about energy savings, especially on those huge buildings that you're talking about, the big
Mhm.
warehouses, the retail, it's really important to be able to have some reflectivity to help reduce energy costs. So, great information. Let's go to our third learning objective, and that is the TPO product lines. I'm
Mhm.
really talking about what Johns Manville and overall in the industry is
Mhm.
offered out there, and how, so for all of you listening, really understanding what's available for you to be thinking about as you're starting to estimate and to either use TPO or understand the TPO that you're already installing with your company. Um, let's start with, we've been talking a lot about white, but
Mhm.
there are other colors of TPO, right?
There are. So in our portfolio, for example, we offer, of course, white, what you see a lot of the time. But we also offer a tan and a gray solution as well. And you'll see it right on our website. A lot of material there is. We have those different options, and a lot of those different options, tan, gray, and white, are also going to have options for the size of the sheet, the thickness of the sheet as well. So it's not just that it needs to be used in one situation and one type only, but we do kind of have different areas, and those kind of change. We have talked a lot about the reflectivity of TPO. So when you go to these other ones, we always want to be kind of cognizant of the use case and how we're using them, because it does change some of those properties. But there are areas where whether it's somebody wants it visually or there is a design constraint that they want to keep with something that may not be white, we do offer. Essentially, tan and grays tends to be what you see a lot in the market.
Okay. And accessories, everything that goes along with installing that quality premium TPO roof. What does that include?
So when we talk accessories, we talk everything from things like walk pads. You want to protect your roof. May you have people going up and servicing the roof or looking at HVAC. So we have walk pads from, things that are going to be bright yellow. So hey, this is where you want to be walking. Maybe you don't want to be in a specific area. So we have things like walk pads. We have things we call them like pipe boots. There are a lot of punctures or terminations coming through a roof. We want to make sure that we are protecting those. We have other things, we call things like pitch pockets to make sure we can seal areas because it's not just the membrane that's on that roof. We have everything else from HVAC where we're going to have to install like details around, say, a corner. So we want to have we have universal corners for inside and outside corners, especially when you get to the edge of the buildings or you get to any of these kind of other components installed on top. And then, of course, we have special things you're going to see all less things you're going to see all the time. Essentially, RTS strips are reinforced termination strips you're going to use at the edge, where you kind of have that upturn to essentially the edge wall condition. So we try to go across, if it's on the roof and you're going to need this component to actually have a completed installed roof, we tend to have those accessories and they vary across the industry.
Interesting, interesting. And you mentioned this when we were talking about fleece back, but you also offer a full range of adhesives.
Correct. So when we talk about adhesives, there's going to be your regular moppable or your rolled on adhesives for your membrane bonding adhesives. We also offer an all season sprayable. So instead of essentially rolling on that adhesive all over for the entire roof, we're going to have a sprayable solution. It's a little bit easier to use. You tend to find a little bit of labor savings because it's a little bit faster. In some areas, we'll offer, say, a water-based adhesive as opposed to the regular membrane bonding adhesives. And then even then, we go a step further as we're talking more about sustainability and the environment is low VOCs or low volatile chemical solutions because we always want to be looking at the future of what can we continue to offer. So yeah, we just as you mentioned, we try to run the gamut for a lot of those adhesives, just like the accessories. If there's a need for it in the market or we think it's going to provide a better solution, we try to make sure that we're innovating to have kind of a large range.
Excellent. Okay, and speaking of newer types of products, so what are some of the TPO variations that you have out there, including, I'd love to hear a little bit about self-adhered.
Self-adhered is a great example of when we talk about innovation and we talk about new products. So one of the big things I've kind of talked about here and we've mentioned is a lot of labor savings with TPO. It's easy to install and it tends to be mechanically fastened. But at the same time, we want to be able we still want to use kind of an adhered solution. So one of the things the market has come out with is we call it the SA or the self-adhered product. So the idea is think of your standard TPO roll, but almost if you think about like a sticker or a Band-Aid, you kind of have this release liner that when you pull it off from there and then you push that material down, that's going to create that bonding. So just with that idea of kind of like a Band-Aid or a sticker, we have a TPO that is self-adhered that will be essentially have that release liner. And that release liner is split halfway down the width of the material so that you can pull half of it off. And that
Ah,
bonding adhesive essentially is already on your TPO material so that you can put that right on the roof. You don't need to be putting down any kind of primer. You're not going to have to put down, mop any other version of adhesive. You're not going to have any buckets, any extra pails that you're going to have, generating waste for a roof that you may not need. And then, especially for the JM version for our self-adhered product, you don't have any you're not going to have any, you're going to have an LVOC solution there. So if you have an occupied building or a re-roof building where you have people inside of it, you're going to have no odor for that. And then you're not going to have all these buckets of adhesive all the way around. So it's kind of that next step of, what else can we provide that makes it a little bit easier to install and something that, maybe occupants aren't going to notice as much as some other solutions.
it also sounds like real potential for labor savings.
Absolutely. Wait, you have a whole less step
Yeah.
to do it, whether it's, putting all those fasteners in or trying to essentially mop out an entire roof for the adhesive, you're going to get an incredible labor savings for that because the material is essentially all encased together
Yeah.
for the membrane and the bonding solution.
Wow.
So
That's
it
so
is a great option.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, and I have one additional question because I just think it's important that everyone knows when we're talking about TPO rolls, they come in all different widths and lengths, right?
Absolutely. So, and that's important, an important feature because in different conditions, as we've talked about, you may have very high uplift, conditions and high uplift pressure. So you want narrower rolls of TPO essentially. So while rolls will go down to say 5 feet wide, and then they kind of step all the way up, you can be up to for jam to 12 feet wide. So you can kind of really dial in not just what you need to meet maybe codes and compliances, but also tailor that with labor savings. When you have a
Hmm.
wider roll, you're gonna have less rolls that you need to put down over the course of an entire roof. So essentially, I think 5 feet to 12 feet is going to be a great option to decide what you need there. And then most tend to be 100 feet
Okay.
for a roll, but that's not a hard and fast rule. There are different lengths, so we do try to provide to the market what they need for again codes compliance and then for labor savings.
Excellent. Wow, Corey, thank you so much. Any last thoughts on just overall roofing companies out there who are using TPO or who are thinking about including TPO in their offerings? Any last advice or how they can get a hold of to work with Johns Manville?
When we talk about what can we provide to our customer, we try to put a lot of our information online, and that's whole areas for the building owner or an architect and designer or a contractor as well, an installer. From there, we also run a lot of training classes. Bercy is a good one,
Yeah.
but we try to make sure that we're doing things just like you and I are doing here today, of educating everybody along the entire process for people that maybe are just specifying it to people that are going to be installing it. So I always push a lot of people to our website. We have a huge collection of information that we try to make sure we keep up to date, certainly with different marketing bulletins and content such as what we're making here now. So I always tell people start at the website and we probably have something for you.
That's great. Oh, Corey, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. This has just been an excellent TPO 101 Lunch and Learn.
Of course, I'm always happy to talk about it, and I'm sure hopefully I'll run into some people in the future that have learned something about it from our talk today.
I love it. I love it. And thank you all for watching today. Be sure that you've been filling out that discussion sheet and that you go online to take the quiz because you might get entered for a free lunch. So be sure to do that and share this with your friends, other roofing professionals, and throughout your company. I hope you all are sitting there together talking about TPO and having a great lunch. We will be seeing you next time on Roofers Coffee Shop Lunch and Learn.